It's a little after 1 p.m. and you've tuned in to New Health Radio on KMUZ 88.5 FM. I'm your host, Nate Darnell, joined by my engineer, Dave Duncan.
Howdy, howdy.
Hi, Dave. How are you today?
Doing good.
In studio today, we have Liz Rogers again of Hot Water fame. She is an independent producer and director of a documentary entitled Hot Water, which can be found at zerohotwater.com, and it's still in pre-release, so she's still on her tour, actually promoting the documentary, which should be released this spring. Liz,
Right.
Can you do a little bit of a test on the mic just to make sure you're with us?
So happy to be here again. I love coming in. The KMUZ is just an amazing, wonderful community radio station, and I'm honored to be a part of it.
We're high gear, as Dave's family would like to say.
Well, it's great to have a little oasis when the next wave of radiation disasters hit. Didn't waste any time, did it?
Oh, man.
Not at all. Well, while you're here, Liz, I know that historically you were involved in a lot of documentation regarding uranium mining, especially around Indian reservations and the legal dilemma happening with that. And that's in large part what your documentary is based on.
Correct.
But during this time, the disaster at the Japanese nuclear power plant, Fukushima, also occurred.
Right.
And you were kind of very uniquely positioned to understand the consequences of this. And I know we've had you on the show twice before. I'm so lucky to have you on again. And I know you're about to hit the road again to start doing more promotions for the documentary. But while you're here, I would like to dedicate today's show to learning a little bit more about the specifics surrounding Fukushima. And especially since we're on the Pacific coast, you know, what we need to be thinking about as far as maintaining our health and reducing our risks.
Absolutely.
So in that process, part of what I'd like to do is go through kind of a couple of topics, one being the new secrecy bill that the government of Japan is currently looking at. I don't know if it's been passed yet, but then also discuss the current legal issue that's being pursued by former crewmen of the USS Ronald Reagan and USS Essex who were called to duty during the initial disaster at Fukushima and who are now suffering all kinds of health-related issues. Then I'd like to discuss the radioactive plume that's currently making its way through the Pacific Ocean and is expected to reach our coast in spring of 2014.
Correct.
Then I'd like to discuss the most recent news surrounding nuclear reactor number 3 at the Fukushima power plant, which it appears might be in the process of melting down as we speak.
Right.
And then talk about some other respectable voices in the community if we can get to that point at the end of the program. So
We only have an hour, right?
we only have an hour. So with regard to Japan and their new proposed secrecy law, according to some of the research that I've been able to review over the past couple of days, whistleblowers and journalists in Japan could soon find themselves facing long spells in prison for divulging and reporting state secrets, possibly including sensitive information about the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Reporters Without Borders, which is an organization committed to transparency, accused Japan of making investigative journalism illegal. Another member of the UN, Navi Pillay, who's a high commissioner for human rights at the UN, accused Japan's government of imposing the legislation with little public debate. They should not, according to Pillay, they should not rush through the law without first putting proper safeguards for access of information and freedom of expression as guaranteed in Japan's constitution and international human rights law, she said. Again, this kind of boils down to Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and his government is planning a state secrets act that critics say could curtail public access to information on a wide range of issues, including what's happening at the current Fukushima site. This new law would dramatically expand the definition of official secrets, and journalists convicted under it, could receive between 5 and 10 years.
Correct. I sorry to interrupt you, but it occurred to me that much of what we're discussing here reflects directly on your conversation on the previous hour about the NSA and all of the things that we are facing right now. State secrets, what should be released, what shouldn't be released, and so on. And in our NSA discussions, where we're talking about the personal intrusion on our personal lives and so on. In the case of Japan, if we're talking about the kinds of things that also could directly impact the lives of innocent citizens. And we are definitely up in arms about Japan's ability to hide this information from the public about what is going on in Fukushima. So if, in fact, Reactor 3 is melting down as we speak, if there's a new fissionable material issue happening there, do we have the right to know? Personally, don't get in my way. That's how I feel. I need to know if that poison is coming toward my grandchildren, my kids.
Well, and I would hazard to guess there's not a grandmother in our vicinity that wouldn't.
Thank you.
They wouldn't feel the same way.
Exactly. There's not a human being alive that would say, "Yeah, I'd rather not know."
And that's why this show exists, and that's why we have voices like yours on the air.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that. So, in the case of Fukushima, if this law, which in my understanding is drafted, I don't know if they've passed it. If they do, it concerns me deeply. We have a big problem getting information out of TEPCO as it is. The news article that I wrote about, that I read about Reactor 3 a couple of days ago, said TEPCO quietly admits that they may be having an issue in Reactor 3. All of this is going on while they're trying to remove the fuel from Reactor 4. 1 and 2 have completely melted down. The source of this steam escaping from Reactor 3, they can only make assumptions about where the steam is coming from. Obviously, something very, very hot has hit water. So if one of those zirconium clads has broken on these rods containing the pellets, and those have started to fission, and they're in cooling pools, that water is obviously boiling off and generating a tremendous amount of steam.
So let's talk about what happened with the crew members aboard the USS Ronald Reagan, and then circle back around to Reactor 3 in just a little bit. But I know that there's currently legal action in process. There are anywhere from 50 to 100 sailors, depending on who's willing to come forth at this point, who were all crewmen and women aboard the USS Ronald Reagan and Essex. And they were immediately called in as the crisis was occurring. And I think
they were called in as relief from the tsunami at that point.
Well, that's right. And as
we didn't know that there had been meltdowns going on at TEPCO.
Right, and this is the challenge. The legal advisor who's actually heading the litigation. His last name is Bonner. Those sailors went in there totally unaware that they were contaminated as a result. They knew there was an active, they knew that there might be an active meltdown, but the country of Japan deliberately hid it from the public, as well as the Navy, and they meaning TEPCO. So that was actually at the end of the article. Let me see if I can.
One of these reports that I have here, the attorney representing the sailors said that at least half of the sailors already have some form of cancer. We're seeing leukemia, testicular cancer, and unremitting gynecological bleeding requiring transfusions and other interventions. Now, all of these sailors, most of them in their 20s, are the ones who have been impacted by this. These are our kids, young people. It's unconscionable that they were not told, or that I'm stammering because I'm so frustrated over this issue. I don't even know what to say.
Well, Mr. Bonner, who's actually leading that litigation, said Tokyo Electric Power knew that radioactivity was leaking at a rate of 400 tons a day into the North Pacific.
Right.
We were probably, according to the sailors who were on aboard those ships, we were probably floating in contaminated water without knowing it for a day and a half before we even got hit by the plume, and we were just talking about the steam that came out of the reactor.
Right.
And that was actually from a crew member who was in charge of monitoring radiation aboard the ships. And he said it was in excess of 300 times what was permissible at that time. And TEPCO officials didn't respond to requests for comment after this litigation was started. But a recent admission before members of the Japanese press on December 12th during a meeting at the Tokyo Press Club, former Prime Minister Naoto Jan said that the first meltdown occurred 5 hours after the tsunami, not the next day as reported at the time. And the attorney alleges that in the statement means that the Japanese government knew radiation was being leaked and didn't inform the U.S. Navy. So the U.S. Navy was essentially floating into this stuff, completely unaware.
Correct. And the water makers that are used on these vessels, desalination plants that take ocean water, desalinate it, and make water for all the use on board these vessels and any commercial and even private vessels in the ocean. Our personal boat had one of these units on it. And it will remove a lot of contamination. In this case, with the levels of contamination in that water, all of the sailors, all of the crew on board those vessels were showering in, drinking, their food was being made with this water. They were exposed to this water, and the mist from this water just on the ocean itself 24/7 in extremely, extremely high doses. Now, it would the fact that they're showing these cancers now, it's highly accelerated. It's been, in March, it'll be 3 years since the meltdown happened. I'm sure that they started occurring. Well, they did start occurring earlier in 2014. It took some time to get this word out and these lawsuits filed. There are pictures and quotes from these sailors because at the time the meltdowns happened, it was winter. It was very, very cold there in Japan. And the steam created moisture, snow. It was literally snowing on the deck of the ship, and it was snowing radioactive particles. The sailors were quoted as saying, "Wow, it's snowing, but why does it taste like aluminum foil?"
Right.
Just sickening. Just unbelievable.
Well, I think more challenging is that a lot of these crewmen that are those who have been diagnosed with cancer, there are still many that have odd, undiagnosable diseases. They've been to upwards of 20 different physicians who can't even identify what's going on with them.
Right.
And I think this is a real challenge. I mean, just imagine, what we're going to be battling here on the Pacific coast, if we don't contain this and the kinds of odd issues that physicians, it's one thing to be a general practitioner. It's another thing to be a medical doctor that specializes in radioactive exposure. Two entirely different disciplines. Mm-hmm. Are we really prepared to handle that? I'm not sure that we are.
I don't think we are in any way prepared. My sister Jo said yesterday, it was very, very well said. She said, "How do you put that genie back in the bottle?" There's no way.
Yeah.
There just is no way. Now, last week, there were measurements done in San Francisco where a plume has hit the city there, and on the coast, the measurements went up 10, 20 times background levels. Obviously coming from the mist,
what's normally expected as far as low-level radiation.
Correct.
And again, I want to clarify that we're exposed to low-level radiation all the time on planet Earth.
Absolutely.
But what's being produced by these technologies and failing technologies are, in some cases, 1 million times higher than what normal background radiation is.
Correct. We have been able to live on this planet for thousands, millions of years, depending on your line of thought about evolution.
I'm with you on that one.
Exactly. Because these elements are deep underground. They are very deep underground. They've been buried underground where we are protected from the alpha emitters, from the radiation, from the gamma radiation that comes from these elements. When we started digging this stuff up, the early part of the last century, and started making stuff out of it, we started to be exposed to it, and all of all of this poison has been released into our air, our groundwater. That is specifically what the movie Hot Water was about and is about. But the situation in Fukushima, as it was in Chernobyl, and even as far back as the 60s, when we had a very, very lightly publicized meltdown at a reactor on the Great Lakes. Once it's in the water, you can't get it out. You cannot get it out. It has to live out its lives and degrade, and it takes tens of thousands of years to do that.
As you were talking, I was vaguely recalling a book that was just released called Half-Lives.
Really?
Does that ring any bells?
No, it doesn't.
Let me see if I can actually look this up real quick. This is actually a book that was based on naval crewmen just following World War II and into the
atomic
60s
veterans
who were in charge of disposing of atomic waste. And a very talented researcher started collecting stories about this.
Right. I do remember something about that. And what they did was they had barrels, and there's actually photographs of these sailors, barrels of nuclear waste, rolling them off the side of the ship into the ocean.
Yes, it's called Half-Lives, and it's a play on words because, half-life and nuclear energy. And what it's basically saying is these soldiers had their lives cut in half. www.halflives.com. And it's a recent book that was written, and it discusses all of this history with this very special naval vessel, and it was the Corsa County or something along those lines that was essentially in charge of disposing of atomic toxic waste. They put it all in 55-gallon drums. These crew members knew nothing about it. They were simply told that they were to navigate their vessel into the Atlantic. They were to shut off all of their lights to indicate that they were in distress, and then they were to dump these barrels overboard into the Atlantic. And those that didn't float, or those that did float, they were supposed to shoot to get them to sink.
That's right. That's right. I did hear that.
Yes. And then
I'm looking at the website now.
And then later, many of these crewmen were experiencing all kinds of bizarre health issues. Some of them had found out about some of the nuclear waste, and they attempted to have Veterans Affairs or the VA treat them as nuclear exposed soldiers exposed to nuclear radiation.
Right.
But based on the legal system, they were declared never to have fought, in theater in a nuclear environment. Therefore, the medical services weren't available to them, and many of them died prematurely.
I'm quiet because if I say what I really want to say, my mother is sitting here in the room with me.
It's a good thing she's chaperoning you today.
I'm just speechless. Although I'll say again, and I made this statement in the film, we've invaded foreign countries based on the fact that their government was hurting their own people. We have injured and killed tens of thousands of our own citizens, our soldiers, because of these nuclear incidents, our nuclear policies. And what kind of story do you have to tell yourself to make that okay? It's not okay.
Yeah.
It is not okay.
And with all of these things floating around in the Atlantic, for decades, what kind of impact has this had on our food supply? We're constantly talking about an uptick in cancer rates. I mean, even without major disasters like Fukushima or
Correct.
3 Mile Island or Chernobyl, the American Cancer Association is still expecting, 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will develop cancer in their lifetimes.
That's right.
And this is a far cry from, the 1 in 20 at the turn of the century,
Right.
the century before,
Right.
100 years ago.
Right.
And it's just been rapidly accelerating.
It's clear that it's environmental. It's absolutely environmental. And it isn't just nuclear energy, and it isn't just uranium mining and all of these offshoots. Yes, there are many other things that cause cancer and that create these problems in the environment. Many of those things are still under question. It took many years to prove conclusively that cigarette smoking caused lung cancer.
Well, to the public, and if you'll remember, Jeffrey Wigand was actually the biochemist who was called in to function as a developer for reduced harm cigarettes by Brown and Williamson, and this was back in the late 80s. And he quickly realized he came from academia, and this was his first real gig with corporate America.
That's right.
And he realized very quickly that they had known for decades that it wasn't the tobacco that actually caused cancer. It was the binding agents they were using in the cigarettes. He also became very aware of the fact that they had been intentionally marketing them to people at a very young age to develop lifelong dependencies.
That's right.
To create continuous cash flow and constant sales. And the moment he spoke out about that, the whole tobacco industry immediately went on a crusade to crucify him.
Absolutely.
And did actually a very good job of it. And he still has his life today, but he teaches high school students, and he's very happy with that.
Yeah.
But even so, people still haven't stopped smoking, and I think that's the most tragic thing.
Right.
He sacrificed a lot personally to bring the truth to light. And some people paid attention, and a lot of people didn't.
That's right. And in this case, we know that these nuclear elements, that these products cause cancer. There's no doubt.
There's no safe level.
Well known. There is no safe level of radiation. Now, here in Salem, we have an issue in West Salem where we have a cluster of children who
Leukemia.
have leukemia,
Osteosarcoma.
Sarcoma, that
Where does it come from?
Where does it come from? There's something that is emitting radon, alpha particles. There's something up there. Now, the EPA has been here. I would love to have been here when the EPA was here. I wasn't aware of it, and that's my bad. I should have known about it and gotten more involved, because I love getting in the face of the EPA and pushing them. They're charged with a very, very difficult mission. And they are not funded, nor are they driven to solve these problems. They're solved to mitigate them as best they can. It's up to individual citizens and citizens groups, community groups, to get involved and stop the problem.
So does that mean that it's also incumbent upon us to influence the EPA to pursue those things that we believe are issues?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Since they may not have a dog in the fight, it may not be urgent for them.
That's absolutely true. When I went to the EPA in Denver over some of the issues that I found while we were filming, we were setting up our camera gear, and I was having a conversation with the gentleman I was interviewing and talking about the cancers, and he said, "Really? Prove it."
That's frightening.
Prove it? Really? You want me to prove it? So I don't think that there is a single cancer that can be proven where its origin was. There's some very, very safe assumptions that can be made, but particular about these radiation exposures. But they're proving the origins of a specific kind of cancer is very difficult to prove. We know uranium is radioactive. We know it causes cancer. We know its byproducts cause cancer. We know radon causes cancer. These alpha nuclides, the effect is cumulative on your system. The EPA's goal for radiation exposure is 0. They know that that is the goal, because anything above that is dangerous. The amount of radionuclides in your drinking water, the goal is 0. The limit that they have set over which action should be taken is 15 picocuries per liter. They're talking about doubling that. Not that it makes it safer.
It
just makes them less.
It's to change public opinion, to make
That's
everyone
right.
feel that it's okay.
That it's okay to have that much more. But their goal remains 0, because they know anything above that is dangerous and can cause these health problems.
Okay, so Liz, what I'd like to talk about next is the plume of radioactive water, and plume meaning in the ocean itself, not evaporating and coming over
Correct.
in cloud form. But I know that the West Coast was initially hit with debris from the tsunami, and that was about a year and a half ago.
Correct.
And now there's a second wave coming, which is much more radioactive, and that's expected to hit the coast sometime in spring of 2014.
Right.
And you alluded to just a little while ago about San Francisco, and they're already detecting upticks. Private citizens are going out with Geiger counters.
Correct.
And actually measuring the mist coming off of the ocean, and it's anywhere from 10 to 15 times more radioactive than normal background radiation.
Correct.
So what information do you have? Do you have any updates on what's happening with this plume and what we can expect from it?
The information that I have or that's available, I get from NOAA as much as
NOAA.
As they have, right? NOAA, and there's I believe it's Swiss or Austrian Geomar, a company who's done a map showing how the plume is expected to move, and it's a really wonderful. For the listeners, you can Google this Pacific radiation plume, any number of keywords that you can use, and you will see several different maps that show how scientists have predicted the movement of the water and how this radiation plume is going to go across the Pacific. The expected, as you said, result is that we should be seeing it by March 2014 or sometime in early spring 2014. However, there are areas, as you said, where it's showing up now. They're seeing increases in radioactivity coming from the ocean. Now, we have seen the impact in our fish in Southern California, where I spend much of my life, where 15 out of 15 bluefin tuna showed radioactivity. Now, I immediately let everyone I know, just no more tuna. And those fish, the route that they take around Japan, up north, around Alaska, and then down the Pacific, that big circuitous route that they take, means that radiation, and the map shows that the radiation will hit Alaska before it hits Washington, Oregon, and then down to California. So I think it's very safe to assume that there might be some serious impact on our salmon and the other halibut that we get from Alaska. My brother-in-law does a lot of time in Alaska every summer, fishing and taking charter trips out fishing up there. Let them know they have to be very careful. And I don't know how they're going to test the fish for that kind of radioactivity. How would you know?
Well, have we ever tried holding a Geiger counter up to one of these fish?
I personally have not, but I am ready anytime.
Well, one of the things that we discussed during the last interview that we had was a program called SafeCast.
Right.
And this is actually, it's a website. It's also an app for your iPhone, and I believe an app for probably the Android and also for your desktop. And what it does is it takes, there's an organization that's all funded by volunteers. There is cost for equipment, but they are radio Geiger counter transponders, which have been placed all around the world, and they send information, measurements back to a primary database, which you then have access to on your phone. And of course, you and I have reviewed this, and we've actually looked at Fukushima and how hot that area actually is.
Yeah.
We've looked at Chernobyl. There's still ambient radiation coming off of that, even underneath this concrete dome.
Correct.
And we've even done some investigations locally. But in the sea, none of these things are floating around. And we don't have any on the coast that I'm aware of.
That's right.
So, I'm thinking about, in the process of our work, how do we get more technology to the coast to begin monitoring these things? Can we rely on our government agencies to do that and to provide the information accurately, or do we need to buy some of these units and go out there and put them in the sand and get readings back from them?
I think we do it ourselves. Honestly.
Perhaps that's it.
If it costs however much, is it $500 for the equipment or something like that? And you get a small community group to go together. Your town budget might be able to afford it. Do it for your town to monitor, particularly if you're on the coast, and get on that network. I'm looking at trying to figure out a way to do it within my community here in Oregon, and certainly it shouldn't be a problem to do that in Los Angeles. There should be a ton of people ready to do it there.
You would think.
You would think, absolutely. Or Catalina Island or any of those islands off the coast of California absolutely should be on that network. It's fascinating to look at. In the case of Chernobyl, I'm almost certain that the hot readings that we are seeing coming from that site are because the sarcophagus covering that reactor is deteriorated and broken, and they're trying to work on a replacement for that now. Burying these things in cement, only 25 years, 30, 40 years. I mean, the lifetime of cement in any environment where you're freezing and thawing and there's moisture involved.
Well, and it's essentially an oven, too. I mean, you've got this heat source that's baking inside of it. So, whatever material the cement is made out of, it's going to suffer decay at some point.
Right. As is the case with Fukushima, Chernobyl, was it 40 years ago?
25 years ago.
25 years ago, forgive me. 25 years ago, they cannot measure, or they can't go in to do repairs or build a new sarcophagus on top of it because the levels there are so lethal.
Going straight up,
that you would die literally in 60 seconds. I mean, literally you would get a lethal dose within a minute. So they're having to build a new concrete sarcophagus that is the size of a football stadium in two pieces on railroad tracks off-site or off-center of this existing sarcophagus. And then when it's done, they're going to have to haul them together over the top of it.
And they close like a clamshell.
Exactly. And that will give them another 25 years, where the half-lives, this fissionable material, it's going to be 10,000 years that this will have to go on. So at some point, the sarcophagus is going to be the size of Manhattan.
Wow. So, I mean, it really strikes me just in the whole engineering of these things. You know, I've actually, in my previous line of work, doing information technology work, I've been called out to numerous different sites, even hydropower plants. Mm-hmm. And I remember going into these massive concrete environments and looking at these giant generators. And they had these huge cranes that were built into the whole design of the building to remove these giant metal generators and parts that weighed tons. And it just seems to me like when you build a nuclear reactor, you should already build in the safety measures with the understanding that if you ever lose control, you will be able to encapsulate this thing and shut it down.
Instantly.
And it seems like they had to do that after the fact with Chernobyl. And it seems like we don't have that design implemented with any of our reactors stateside.
I certainly don't with Fukushima. Now, again, for you listeners, all of our nuclear reactors, and specifically these reactors in Fukushima and the others in Japan, the 50 other reactors that they do have in Japan, the fuel that's used, the spent fuel and the new fuel that's used, is stored in cooling pools above the reactor. It's basically in an attic, second, third floor, whatever you want to call it, in these giant cooling pools. Storing this material in an attic, who thought this up? Who thought this was a good idea?
You know, I don't know, but it's interesting that Dale Bridenbaugh, who was one of the 3 engineers that GE sent over initially to nuclearize Japan as far as their power production is concerned. He was called one of the 3. And 35 years ago, he resigned and walked off the job. Really? Because the Mark I designs that they were implementing, he said, look, your heat containment process isn't sufficient enough for this. Any little disaster could cause this thing to boil over, and for lack of a better term. And he received a tremendous amount of criticism. They went through with the designs anyway. And again, he resigned because he didn't want that on his conscience.
Right.
I think at the time he was in his early 30s. Now he's in his, 70s.
Right.
And he in a couple of, we actually spoke about this too on the last interview that we did, where he had a video that had been posted, and when we went to review it, it had already been taken down.
Wow.
And that was very interesting, and I don't know if that was a copyright issue, but nonetheless, and it was his personal testimony that he was giving, and it's basically it's a current interview that was done based on what he knew back then.
Wow.
And he said, what's happening today is exactly what I feared would happen 35 years ago. And this is indeed the problem. They will work so long as there is no minor catastrophe. And then with a minor catastrophe, it becomes a major catastrophe.
That's right. Arnie Gunderson from Fairwinds was a nuclear engineer, had his nuclear operator's license, and was still convinced that nuclear was a viable energy source up until Fukushima. And now he's one of our most vocal activists on the problems surrounding nuclear energy.
Well, I think most engineers, they look at the energy consumption that we're using. And it's like every generation we consume even more and more electricity.
That's right.
And they think in terms, and I understand this, which is how are we going to satisfy the electrical needs of this growing digital economy?
Right.
And logically, if you take all the politics out of it, logically, nuclear is the only technology that pound for pound and square foot wise can produce the kind of energy that we need. But oftentimes they're not familiar with the political side, which is the uranium mining side, which is creating, and the front end there, which is creating many of these health issues, and it's a lot dirtier than they ever understood.
Well, and nuclear, Arnie Gunderson says, and so correctly, he says, with nuclear energy, you can have 40 really good years and one really bad day.
Yeah.
Is the risk worth the reward? I personally have just bought 2 fantastic little solar chargers for my phone that work beautifully. I don't even have to plug my phone in. We have to start rethinking how we use energy, our sources of energy. We have been so spoiled as baby boomers on, very, very spoiled with the idea that if you need more electricity, you just put another outlet in the wall. That's all you need to do. We don't turn off the lights. We don't think efficiently about how we use energy. If you count the number of things you have plugged in your home that are a constant draw of electricity, even when you're not using them, your microwaves, all of your alarm clocks, and all of the these mishmash of gadgets that we think we have to have when no one wants to go back to pioneer days or anything like that. But still, there are definitely ways that we can reduce our energy load. I found out that in my home here in Oregon, that by going solar, even here, I can reduce my energy costs by 70%, my energy usage just by going solar to feed the stuff that I just have running during the day. That's huge. And nuclear is 20% of average, 20% of our overall national energy usage. Well, that's just crazy. It's crazy. We could get rid of it tomorrow. Of course we could. There's a beautiful, this thing in Nevada, just outside Las Vegas, in Primm, Nevada, there is a new solar farm down there that is traffic stopping on Highway 15. It is spectacular. These concentrated mirrors, huge fields of mirrors, concentrated on 3 different towers that pump water, generate steam, and they have a technology using, I believe it's a salt compound, which ties into the thorium reactors, salt breeder reactors. This salt stores the energy, so you can have energy after the sun goes down. Yes, you can use your lights after the sun goes down using these new technologies.
Let's talk about thorium, and school me on this.
Well, I am still schooling myself. This is quite a complex issue to my simple brain, but thorium is the element of thorium. I'm going to get my notes here so we all are on the same page here. Thorium was discovered in the 1800s, named after the god Thor, the god of thunder. And thorium is a very low-level alpha emitter. It's very common in the environment, many, many more times common than uranium. there is a movement to create thorium reactors, and the concept here is that thorium produces much less waste.
Is it warm instead of hot?
Thorium has to be processed in order to make it reactive. And in order to start that process, you have to use uranium, and then it emits uranium as a byproduct. So in order to use these thorium reactors, and again, it's my understanding, and I do have more work to do to understand it better, these thorium reactors will emit uranium-232 as a byproduct, which they'll then put back into it to create more, I believe it's a melted salt.
Kind of a
slurry reactor that creates the heat, that boils the water, that runs the turbines, that power the generators that make the electricity. So the claim is that these thorium reactors will produce a tremendous amount less waste than our nuclear reactors that we have right now. The challenges, there are many, many challenges. One theory is that the government ceased funding the development of thorium reactors very early on because thorium is not, you can't use it to develop a weapon.
Yeah, and this is also an interesting argument that has come across my desk, and I look at a lot of conspiracy theories, and some I agree with, some I don't. I don't have an opinion on this yet, but one of the arguments that is used by some is that our nuclear power industry has really nothing to do with nuclear power generation. It has to do with a legal side of producing uranium for weapons manufacturing.
That's how it started, and it's pretty much stayed that way. Very little of it is used for medical purposes. Now, this thorium, my understanding is that once they start this process, you have to have a processing and reprocessing plant on site so that the uranium that comes out of it is reprocessed and goes back in and creates more. So it's this kind of circuitous.
It's a closed loop system.
It's a closed loop system.
Yeah.
They are saying that a milk carton sized or whatever small amount of this thorium waste, comparable to 3.5 million tons of coal, comparable to 300 million tons or something of uranium. So that's a big selling point. However, the amount of uranium that does come out of this process is fissionable and is highly concentrated and can be used for weaponry. So if these small reactors are in the United States, we can control that fairly well. At least now we can, from a standpoint of getting a hold of this material. We're better prepared to take care of that and control it. However, foreign countries, if they're using these reactors, that's a very different subject.
And are they simpler to construct?
Apparently they are, I'm going to say simpler, very, very costly. It's going to take many, many billions of dollars to develop this technology and get it going. Now, Wall Street will not invest in nuclear.
That's because, it's too risky for Wall Street.
It's too risky.
That's saying something.
Seriously. Yeah. Thorium reactors, no. This all is coming from private investors to try to develop this stuff. So the first money goes into marketing, because the better the marketing, the more investors you're going to get.
Right.
So the pros and cons we need to study a little further. What I have seen so far, thorium is an alpha emitter. It is radioactive. It's in much lower levels. It's a much more common element on Earth than uranium. There are very tiny amounts of it in much of what we're exposed to every day, but it's very, very small.
Sure.
Very small.
So in the minutes that we have left, I want to go back and I want to revisit Fukushima Reactor 3.
Right.
Because that's getting some press right now as we speak.
Yes.
And fill me in on what some of that most recent press is.
Most recently, since December 24th, we suspect that one report from December 13th relating to the steam coming from Reactor 3.
And there's been an increase, a large increase.
A large increase, December 24th, 25th, and over the last few days. of steam coming from reactor 3, which means water is hitting something very, very, very hot. And the only hot stuff in reactor 3 is fissionable material. So that means either that some of the remaining fuel that is clad in this zirconium, which keeps the uranium or plutonium pellets, this MOX fuel,
Contained.
contained.
It's kind of like the outside wrapper in a cigarette.
Exactly. Holds it all together, keeps it from becoming fissionable. Now, if the water levels have changed, if one of those zirconium cladding elements has been fractured, and those uranium pellets are now fissionable, generating a tremendous amount of heat. That's coming from somewhere. They don't know where. Is now boiling off the cooling water that's in reactor 3. If it has melted down, and there's no way for them to tell this, they can't get close enough to even get a camera in there to tell what's happening. It is so dangerous. Robots die in minutes.
That's bad.
That's bad. It may have melted through into the groundwater, and that might be what's steaming.
Right.
It may be that bad. Now,
Well,
if that's the case,
there's runoff going right underneath that facility. So any of that
Absolutely.
groundwater is going to go right into the Pacific Ocean, which
That's
again is going to make its way our direction.
exactly. If you look at a cross-section of that landscape in Japan, there's the mountains, say Mount Fuji in the background, and then going down, the runoff goes under the plant and into the water. The plant is however many feet above the groundwater, but these meltdowns in these reactors, when they say melting through to China, boy, it's melting through to
The core of planet Earth.
the core of planet Earth. So
Yeah.
hitting groundwater or water that's cooling water being pumped in, either way, it's really, really bad news. If it gets worse and there's another explosion in that reactor, if that's possible, they're still trying to move the fuel out of reactor 4 right next to it.
Right.
They expect that to take well into 2017. The description of that process is that it's trying to remove a cigarette from a crushed pack. If reactor 4 were to have a similar problem, and this is the description that they give of reactor 4 and pulling those rods out. If one of those assemblies, if those rods, the protective coating is cracked and that material starts to fission, that water starts to boil, there could be an explosion in reactor 4. If reactor 4 explodes, given the amount of fuel that's in that reactor now, it's the equivalent of 14 to 15,000 Hiroshima bombs in that one building.
Wow.
Reactor 3, because we don't know.
I can't even imagine that.
It's beyond anything that any of us could fathom. The impact on the west coast of the United States, incalculable.
So
If that
what?
happens.
Just to put this into context, like for normal people, based on your experience in studying the uranium issue, the issues surrounding Fukushima, what are practical countermeasures that we could implement?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, there are a
boy.
lot of people that probably just want to move east, but
Yeah,
I'm not
east.
sure it's any better. I've looked at the uranium mine maps, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure that it's any better over there.
It isn't. It really isn't. I mean, we have this issue in Virginia where they're trying to control the uranium mining there. The smartest thing that we can do is take health measures to protect ourselves against the impacts of these radionuclides, whatever they may be. It's going to be about antioxidants. There are a lot of things we need to do health-wise, food-wise. You and I can have a long discussion about antioxidants and some of the properties in some of these hydrolyzed water, hydrogen water impacted things that can make a significant difference in your health to help protect you from external exposure to radioactive properties.
I'd love to do it.
I'm in.
Fantastic. Well, listen, we're at the top of the hour today. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and close the show. And I know you're going to get back on tour and promote your documentary,
Right.
and we will be in touch. I
Absolutely.
think we're actually planning to go do some investigative research on using our Geiger counters on the coast here shortly.
That's right. We want to see if anything is showing up on the Oregon coast here.
That's
we
right.
will let you know.
So listeners, stay tuned, and we'll post those on the YouTube channel as well. Perfect. So you have spent the last hour, last eye-glazing, brain-swelling hour listening to Nate Darnell and Liz Rogers, working with Dave Duncan, our engineer, on New Health Radio. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to send us an email at newhealthnation@gmail.com. Again, that's newhealthnation@gmail.com, and that's spelled with an N-U. Tune in again next week for the next edition of New Health Radio on KMEZ 88.5 FM. Until then, this is Nate Darnell wishing you well.